I never thought the week that was meant to be the happiest of my life would turn into a full-scale family row. I'm talking raised voices down the phone, calls ending with someone hanging up in my ear, and relatives whispering about me as if I'd done something unforgivable. All because of one decision, one boundary I refused to back down on. And now half my family seems convinced I'm the villain of my own wedding story. So this is the question that's been going round and round in my head for weeks now. Did I really do something so awful? Or are people expecting me to give up the one day that's supposed to belong to me? Because the truth is, this whole mess started because of a 5-year-old girl and the 2 adults in her life who never tell her no. Let me start at the beginning. My fiancé and I decided nearly 2 years ago that we wanted a small, intimate wedding. Nothing massive, nothing chaotic. Nothing that felt like we were performing for a crowd. Just the people closest to us. Around 50 guests altogether. The sort of wedding where you can actually look people in the eye, have real conversations, and feel every moment instead of being lost in a blur of strangers. We chose Vienna, Austria for the wedding. It's a place that means a lot to both of us. Elegant, romantic, full of history. Exactly the sort of atmosphere we wanted, but because it's a destination wedding, planning it has been intense. Flights, hotels, venues, dinners, transport. Every tiny decision seems to come with a price attached. And when I say expensive, I mean seriously expensive. The sort of money where every detail matters, and every extra complication feels like it could send the entire plan off the rails. Right from the start, we also made one rule absolutely clear. No children. Not because we hate kids. Not because we were trying to be nasty. But because we wanted an adult atmosphere. A calm, elegant event where people could enjoy wine, listen to long speeches, relax, celebrate, and not have the whole thing broken up by noise or chaos. And honestly, nearly everyone understood. When we sent out invitations and spoke to friends and relatives with children, every single one of them was absolutely fine with it. Some even said they were looking forward to having a rare, child-free weekend. They sorted childcare, some grandparents stepped in, some booked babysitters, a few even treated it like a little holiday away. No drama at all. At least, not until we spoke to my brother and his wife. Now, my brother and I have always had a decent relationship. We're not the sort of siblings who ring each other every day, but we've always got on well enough. We grew up together. We've supported one another when it mattered. The usual sort of sibling dynamic. But things changed quite a bit after he and his wife had their daughter. My niece is nearly 5 now. And from the day she was born, my sister-in-law made it very clear that their entire world was going to revolve around her. Which, to be fair, isn't exactly unusual with new parents. Except with them, it never eased off. They don't go anywhere without her. They don't leave her with babysitters. They barely even leave her with family, unless it's my mum. And when I say barely, I really mean never. Date nights? No chance. Weekend breaks? Never. Even something as simple as going out for dinner usually ends with their daughter right there in the middle of it all. At first, I didn't think much of it. Every family raises their children differently. But as she got older, something else became impossible not to notice. They don't set boundaries at all. If she wants something, she gets it. If she throws a tantrum, they give in. If she screams, they just wait for it to blow over. And unfortunately, she screams quite a lot. I don't say that lightly. I'm not one of those people who can't stand children simply for being children. But this little girl has learnt very quickly that if she makes enough noise or causes enough disruption, her parents will cave.
And the clearest example of that happened at my cousin's wedding last year.
I remember standing there during the speeches. The room had gone quiet. Everyone listening to this genuinely emotional toast. My cousin was talking about his wife, about their future together, about how lucky he felt. It was actually a lovely moment. And then my niece walked straight up to the front of the room, not quietly. She started talking loudly, waving her arms about, trying to pull everyone's attention onto her. At first, people gave that little polite laugh people always do. You know the one. The classic, kids will be kids reaction. But then she didn't stop. She kept interrupting, kept talking over the speech, kept wandering about in front of everyone. And my brother and sister-in-law, they just sat there. No one got up to move her. No one told her to stop. No one even attempted to step in. Eventually, someone else had to gently lead her away while the whole room sat there in awkward silence, waiting for the speech to continue. That moment really stayed with me, because while it might sound small, it completely broke the atmosphere of the wedding. The emotional rhythm of the whole moment just vanished. And I remember thinking very clearly, if I ever get married, I don't want that sort of chaos anywhere near my ceremony. Fast forward to planning my own wedding. When I rang my brother and explained the no children rule, I honestly thought it would just be a practical conversation about logistics. Instead, it became the beginning of a disaster. My sister-in-law immediately said there was no way they could leave their daughter behind. Not for a week, not even for a few days. She said she doesn't trust babysitters, doesn't want strangers looking after her child, and refuses to be that far away from her. So I suggested what everyone else was doing. Leave her with family, specifically with my mom. And that was when things became awkward, because my mom was already coming to Vienna for the wedding, which meant, obviously, she couldn't stay at home in England and babysit. When I pointed that out, my sister-in-law sounded instantly irritated. She said perhaps their daughter could just come with them to Vienna. And I said that wouldn't work. Not for the ceremony, not for the reception, and definitely not for the hotel where the wedding party would be staying the night before. That hotel was part of the experience we'd arranged for the wedding party, something we were paying for. A quiet, organized environment so everyone could prepare for the ceremony without distractions. If they brought their daughter, they'd need to sort out their own hotel. And if they insisted on taking her to Vienna, they'd also have to find childcare there for the night of the wedding. That was the point where my sister-in-law completely lost it. Her voice shot up several levels, and she said there was absolutely no way she was leaving her daughter with a stranger in another country. Then she said something that genuinely caught me off guard. She told me my niece would be coming to the wedding, no matter what, as if it wasn't even open for discussion, as if the rule simply didn't apply to them. I remember feeling this slow wave of irritation rising up my spine, because this wasn't about one tiny compromise. This was about them expecting the entire structure of the event to bend around the way they chose to parent. So I told them, calmly but firmly, that the rule applied to everyone. No children, not even my niece. And if they couldn't come without her, then perhaps they shouldn't come. The silence after I said that was heavy. And that was the moment everything truly exploded. The second those words left my mouth, I knew there was no taking them back. For a moment, nobody said anything. It was the kind of silence that feels thick, as if the air itself suddenly gets heavier. I could hear my own breathing down the line, steady and controlled. But inside my chest, my heart was pounding like I'd just walked into a fight. Then my sister-in-law erupted, not mildly annoyed, not upset. I mean genuinely furious. She started saying I was being unreasonable, that I was excluding my own niece, that I was punishing a child simply for existing. The words came flying out so quickly, it felt as though she'd been storing up this anger for ages and had finally found a reason to unleash it. My brother didn't say much at first. He was trying to calm her down in the background. I could hear him murmuring things like, "Let's just talk about this," while she spoke over him. But then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "She's family," she said. "Family should always be welcome." And that was the moment I realized we weren't even having the same conversation, because in my mind, this wasn't about rejecting family. It was about protecting the one day that was meant to belong to me and my fiancé. But to her, it had become something else entirely. A loyalty test. A question of whether her child mattered more than the rules everyone else had already agreed to. I tried to explain that again. I told them every other guest with children had already made arrangements. Some of them had toddlers. Some had babies. But they understood the sort of wedding we were trying to create, and none of them demanded special treatment. But my sister-in-law cut me off again. She said, "Your niece isn't like other children." And I remember thinking, yes, that is exactly the problem. Obviously, I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I told her the rule wasn't about one child. It was about keeping the event consistent. If we let one child attend, then suddenly we'd have to explain why everyone else's children weren't allowed. And that would create a whole new set of issues. But she refused to hear it. Her voice got even sharper. "Are you seriously telling me my daughter isn't welcome at your wedding?" I took a slow breath. "She isn't invited," I said. "The wedding is adults only." Another long silence followed. Then she said something that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. "Then maybe you shouldn't expect us to come either." I actually nodded when she said that, even though she couldn't see me. "That might be the best solution," I replied. The call ended shortly after. No goodbye, no effort to smooth things over, just cold silence as she hung up. For the rest of that evening, I sat there staring at my phone, wondering whether I'd just set off a bomb inside my own family. And apparently, I had. Because the next morning, my phone started ringing. First, it was my mum. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they don't want to start a row, but very clearly disagree with you. She asked what had happened. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The child-free rule, the planning, the hotel situation, the fact that everyone else had already agreed to it. She listened quietly. Then she sighed, and that sigh told me exactly where the conversation was going. "Maybe you could just make an exception," she said gently. I felt that same irritation creeping back in. "Mom," I said, "if I make an exception for them, how do I explain that to everyone else?" "Well, she is your niece," she replied, as though that settled it. But it didn't. Because the more I thought about it, the more unfair it felt. What about my friends who booked babysitters? What about the relatives who rearranged their plans? What about the people flying across Europe who respected the rule without complaint? If I suddenly made a special exception for my brother's daughter, it would basically tell everyone else that their effort meant nothing, and I wasn't willing to do that. So I told my mum exactly that, and that was when her tone changed. She said I was being stubborn, that weddings are about family, that I ought to be more understanding because my brother and his wife simply love their daughter very much. I wanted to say something sarcastic like, "So does every other parent who still managed to respect the rule," but I held it in. Instead, I just repeated that the rule applied to everyone. Then the real pressure began. My brother rang later that day. This time he sounded less angry and more disappointed. He said he didn't understand why I was making this into such a big issue.
"Can't you just let her come to the ceremony?" he asked. "She can sit quietly."
I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea of my niece sitting quietly through a wedding ceremony was so completely unrealistic that it felt like we were talking about a different child entirely. This was the same little girl who screamed if she got the wrong colored cup. The same little girl who interrupted a wedding speech because she wanted attention. And the same parents who had never once told her no in public. But again, I didn't say that. I simply repeated the rule. Adults only. And that was when my brother finally said what he'd probably been thinking all along. You're choosing a rule over your own family. That sentence hit harder than I expected, because technically, he wasn't wrong. But it also wasn't that simple. What he was really asking me to choose was whether my wedding would center around the plans my fiancé and I had made, or around the way they parent their child. And those two things just did not fit together. The conversation didn't end well. He said they couldn't leave their daughter. I said I wasn't changing the rule, so we reached the same conclusion again. They weren't coming. I thought that would be the end of it. But instead, the whole thing spread through the family like wildfire. Aunties started messaging me. Cousins started calling. Even relatives I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly had strong opinions about my wedding. Some tried to stay neutral. Others were very clearly on my brother's side. I started hearing the same lines over and over. It's only one child. She's your niece. Family should come first, and the worst one of all. Are you really going to exclude your brother from your wedding? Every time someone said that, it felt like another little weight landing on my chest, because I never wanted my brother to miss my wedding. That was never the goal. The goal was simply to protect the day we'd spent 2 years planning. But somehow, the story had shifted. Now I was the difficult one, the cold one, the one who cared more about rules than family. Even my dad eventually rang. He didn't shout. He hardly ever shouts. But his voice had that firm edge that meant he thought I'd gone too far. He said I ought to reconsider. That sometimes being the bigger person means bending a little. But the strange thing was, the more pressure people put on me, the more certain I became that I was right, because nobody was asking my brother and sister-in-law to compromise. Nobody was asking them to make adjustments. Every suggestion was aimed at me. I was the one expected to change. I was the one expected to bend. I was the one expected to make the exception. And the more I thought about that, the more unfair it all felt. This wedding was already costing a fortune. My fiancé and I had spent endless hours planning every detail. We'd worked around everyone's schedules. We'd even paid for part of the accommodation to make things easier for people. But apparently the single boundary we set was still too much. So eventually, I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining myself. I just told everyone the same thing. The wedding is adults only. The rule is not changing. And if my brother and his wife cannot attend without bringing their daughter, then I understand if they choose not to come. Of course, that didn't stop the whispers. Now I keep hearing the same labels attached to my name. Difficult, selfish, unreasonable. And sometimes I catch myself wondering whether maybe they're right. Maybe I am being too rigid. Maybe this really is just about one little girl. But then I remember that moment at my cousin's wedding. The interrupted speeches. The awkward silence. The parents who did absolutely nothing. And the realization that my own wedding could very easily become the same sort of situation. And suddenly the decision feels much clearer again. Still, I can't stop asking myself the same question. Did I protect my wedding? Or did I ruin my relationship with my brother? I wish I could say things settled down after that. That everyone took a breath, realized it had all been a misunderstanding, and moved on. But that isn't what happened. Instead, the tension kept building, slowly and quietly, like pressure inside a sealed bottle. Every conversation with my family started to feel strained, shorter, colder, and there was always this invisible weight hanging over everything. The wedding. Or more specifically, my brother not coming to it. At first, I told myself everyone just needed time. Emotions were running high, and eventually people would calm down. But the nearer the wedding got, the worse everything seemed to feel. Family group chats that used to be full of jokes and everyday nonsense suddenly went quiet whenever I said anything. Phone calls felt awkward. Even simple conversations somehow drifted back to the same argument. Are you really still not letting her come? It was as if people were waiting for me to crack, waiting for the moment I'd finally say, fine, bring her. And sometimes I nearly did. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was worth it. Wondering whether the stress was ruining the whole experience anyway. Because planning a wedding is already overwhelming. There are 1,000 tiny details, deadlines, budgets, decisions. Usually, family helps take some of that pressure away. Instead, mine had become the biggest source of it. My fiancé noticed, too. One evening, we were sitting at the kitchen table going over the seating plan when she looked at me and said quietly, "Your shoulders have been tense for weeks." I hadn't even realized until she said it, but she was right. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt that same knot tighten in my stomach. Another message, another argument, another attempt to convince me I was the one being unreasonable. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You do know you're not wrong, don't you?" she said. I shrugged. I don't know anymore. And that was the truth. Because when enough people repeat the same criticism over and over, it starts to burrow into your mind. Even if you begin completely certain, doubt slowly works its way in. What if I am being stubborn? What if this is one of those things I'll regret for years? But my fiancée shook her head before I could spiral too far. "Everyone else respected the rule," she said. "Why should they be the exception?" It was such a simple question, and yet no one in my family had given me a proper answer. A few days later, something happened that pushed everything to another level. My brother rang again, but this time his voice sounded different. Not angry, not disappointed, cold. He said they'd thought about everything I'd said, and they'd made their decision. They would not be coming to Vienna. I felt this odd mix of emotions when he said that. Part of me had expected it. Another part of me had still hoped they'd work something out. Maybe leave their daughter with a relative for a few days. Maybe compromise on the hotel situation. Something. But instead, they'd drawn their own line.
"If our daughter isn't welcome," he said, "then we're not welcome either."
I didn't reply straight away. I just stared at the wall in front of me, feeling this heavy pressure in my chest, because hearing him say it out loud made it feel final. He wasn't just missing a party. He was missing one of the biggest days of my life. Eventually, I said something simple. "I understand." And I did mean it. Even if I didn't agree with their choice, I understood the logic behind it. Parents put their children first, but understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, long enough for the room around me to go completely quiet, long enough for my fiancé to come in and ask what had happened. When I told her, she put her arms round me without saying anything, and that was when the sadness really hit. Not the stress, not the frustration, just sadness. Because growing up, I'd always imagined my brother standing beside me on my wedding day, laughing, telling some embarrassing story from our childhood in his speech, raising a glass with me at the reception. Those moments were gone now. Not because of some major betrayal, not because of some dramatic family secret, but because we couldn't agree on one boundary. And yet, even with that sadness sitting in my chest, I still didn't regret the decision. Because every time I imagined changing the rule just for them, I could picture exactly how the day might unfold. My niece running about the reception, interrupting speeches, throwing a tantrum the moment she wasn't the center of attention, and my brother and sister-in-law doing absolutely nothing. Maybe that wouldn't have happened, but based on everything I've seen, it probably would. And I couldn't shake the feeling that if I allowed that, I'd spend my entire wedding day waiting for the next disruption. A few days after that call, my mum tried one last time. She asked if we could meet, so we met for coffee. She looked tired when she sat down opposite me, the sort of tired that comes from being stuck in the middle of two people you love. "I just want this family to be all right," she said softly. "So do I," I replied. She stirred her coffee for a moment before speaking again. "Your brother is really hurt." "I know. He feels like you're pushing him away." I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. "I'm not pushing him away," I said. "I set a boundary." She nodded slowly. "I know you did." Then she looked up at me. "But sometimes boundaries have consequences." I didn't answer straight away, because she was right. They do. Setting a boundary means somebody might not like it. And in this case, my brother didn't. But at the same time, boundaries also protect something, and what I was protecting was the experience of my wedding. Eventually, my mum sighed again and said something that stuck with me. "I just hope this doesn't turn into something that lasts for years." That thought had crossed my mind too. Family conflicts have a habit of lingering, especially when pride gets involved. But by then, everything had already been said. So we finished our coffee, hugged goodbye, and left the conversation hanging there between us. Now the wedding is only a few weeks away. The guest list is finalized. The flights are booked. The venue is ready. And my brother's name isn't on the seating plan. Sometimes that reality still catches me off guard. But when I step back and look at the whole situation, I still believe I made the right choice. My wedding day should be about celebrating love, not managing chaos. Still, I am curious what other people would think, because I'm still trying to make sense of all this. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have made an exception for your niece? Or would you have stood your ground like I did? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe.